So this is a review for Porky at the Crocadero, released in 1938. It's the 191st in the series, and it's directed by Frank Tashlin. You can find this short on the Looney Tunes Gone Collection Volume 5 DVD set, and on the Porky Pig 101 DVD set. I have a link below to those sets. You won't find this on YouTube unless Warner Brothers themselves choose to upload it, and even if they do, there might be some bits that they may cut out. So those sets are definitely the best way to see this short. But in case you haven't seen this one, you have Porky Pig outside the Crocadero, where Porky dreams of becoming a band leader. Porky gets a job doing the dishes, the boss fires him, but the band leaders for that night don't show up, so he brings Porky back, and Porky then impersonates several famous band leaders, which we'll certainly go through all the references in this extra long review for you. So in this review, you're going to obviously hear from me, but you're also going to hear from my good friend Manny Cruz, the Toonie Tenor, because could it be that this is music related? Yeah, that would be why, now wouldn't it? In fact, he's doing the heavy lifting on this one. If anything, I feel like Porky Pig in a Bob Clampett short. Let's see if you guys get that reference. But you'll also hear from my good friend Austin Kelly, a self-professed Tashlin-holic, and he'll just give a few thoughts as well, and I'll add that in towards the end. But let's first say hi to the main attraction of this review.
Hi everyone, this is Manny Cruz, the Toonie Tenor, coming at you with the latest edition of It's Time for Manny's Music Time, with music trivia for you today. Bye. For the 1938 Looney Tune cartoon, Porky at the Crocadero, directed by my fellow Jersey boy, Frank Tashlin. So you're probably saying, Manny, what are you doing here? This is not a merry melody. Why are you coming on for a Looney Tune? Well, it's very appropriate that I come on for this one because this is such a music-heavy cartoon, and this is actually one of my personal favorites from Frank Tashlin.
So before we actually discuss the cartoon itself, let's discuss what the title actually means, and lucky me, Manny has already gone through what the Crocodero is actually referring to.
So you're probably wondering, what exactly is a Crocodero? So a Crocodero is a relative of the crocodile. Never mind. That joke is not going anywhere at all, so I'll quit while I'm ahead. So the Crocodero actually is a parody of the name of the Trocadero, which was a club in real life. So the information I'm about to read for you comes from the westhollywoodhistory.org website. So let's learn a little bit more about the namesake of this cartoon. All right? Porky is a pig. No. Let's talk about the Crocodero part. So here we go. And I quote, "There were dozens of nightclubs operating at various times along the Sunset Strip in its early years, the 1920s through the 50s. Among them, however, 3 were so popular with celebrities that they achieved household name status nationwide and became famous around the world. The Cafe Trocadero, Ciro's, and Mocambo," unquote. So obviously this cartoon is parodying the Cafe Trocadero. Ciro's was referenced in Hollywood Steps Out, the 1941 Tex Avery cartoon, and the Mocambo was referenced as the Macrumbo, which was parodied in the 1947 cartoon Slick Hair from Friz Freleng. So I'm going to continue reading, and I quote, "The first 2 clubs, Cafe Trocadero, the Troc, and Ciro's, were launched by Billy Wilkerson, a nightclub impresario and the founder and the publisher of The Hollywood Reporter, a magazine or newspaper that still exists to this day." I added that little part in. Anyway, continuing on, and I quote, "The building that would house the Trocadero had been occupied by La Boheme, a cafe at 8610 Sunset Boulevard in Sunset Plaza. La Boheme was closed by authorities in early 1934 because it had offered both cross-dressing performers on stage and illegal backroom gambling downstairs. It had also sold liquor illegally, but the prohibition had ended that year," unquote. So, I see the name La Boheme and I think of the opera by Giacomo Puccini. Sorry, Puccini. We'll talk about you another time. So, continuing on with the Trocadero, and I quote, "The location was ideal for the celebrities Wilkerson intended to attract. It was in Sunset Plaza, on the Sunset Strip, about halfway between Beverly Hills, where they lived, and Hollywood, where they worked. Billy Wilkerson acquired the building, remodeled the interior in his trademark Hollywood Regency modern style, and readied it for a grand opening on September 17, 1934. The name was a reference to Trocadero Plaza at the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France, Wilkerson's favorite town. The Troc soon became the top A-list place to be seen in Hollywood. Movie stars could be assured Wilkerson would publish photographs taken at the club in the next issue of The Hollywood Reporter. Wilkerson viewed the club as a special reserve of the rich and famous, unquote. So what they would do at the Trocadero is pretty much whenever you go to a club or a fancy place and they have velvet ropes blocking you off and you have the big scary bodyguard saying, hey, you could come in, you can't. Pretty much that, I don't know if it originated from the Trocadero, but that whole sense of exclusivity, like, ooh, this is where all the big wigs go and the big shots. The Trocadero helped like push that idea, where it's like, no, you can come in, but you can't. And, it's very glitzy and glamorous. And also it was not cheap to dine there, as Porky sees in the cartoon, where he encounters the reality of how expensive it was. I mean, regular people could go to the Trocadero, but you would be easily paying several days' worth of your salary just to get a bite to eat or get a drink there and all that. The Trocadero went through a series of owners after Wilkerson sold the club in 1937, and it did have ties to organized crime. Guys like Bugsy Siegel and other gangsters of that period weren't involved in the whole scene of clubs and whatnot, but, that doesn't come as a surprise. And the club finally closed for good shortly after World War II in 1947. So besides this cartoon, you do see live action footage, actually, of the Trocadero in the 1944 Bob Clampett cartoon, What's Cooking Doc, at the very beginning of the short. So there's your little history on the Trocadero, or as we call it in this cartoon, the Crocodero. Because what a crock, huh? I crack myself up, and I don't know why. So speaking of expensive, jumping ahead a little bit in the cartoon, but you have Porky Pig looking at how much it is to dine at the Trocadero, and he sees that it costs $25.50 with food on a plate, and haha, it's a clever little joke. And according to my trusty inflation calculator, that would cost around $570 in 2024 money. So yeah, I can see why Porky was so bummed out that he wasn't able to get a bite to eat, and he felt crushed. Poor guy. So before I go any further, I just want to thank a few people for the research for this one, because there's so much stuff I want to talk about. And again, I'm just always under threat of Anthony, sending a killer koala at me for recording so much. But I want to thank, in particular, Daniel Goldmark, his research for the cue sheets, as well as the commentary that he did on the Looney Tunes Golden Collection for this particular cartoon. James Parton is needle drop notes on cartoon research. Definitely got a lot of cool information from there. My pal Stephen Hartley with his Likely Looney, Mostly Merry blog, which he no longer has at the moment, but please check him out on Instagram. He has an amazing page, 1.perfect.frame. Lots of great animation stuff, a lot of frames from different time periods, as well as our buddy, friend of the channel and a personal friend of mine, Devin Baxter, because he dropped in some interesting stuff in Steven's blog that definitely helped in the research of this cartoon. Just, he's a swell guy too. Follow him on social media as well.
Well, I was going to send that killer koala over to you for giving me such a long recording, but since A, the recording is actually really cool, as you guys will find out in just a moment, and 2, you shouted out some really cool people, including mutual friends, okay, I'll keep the killer koala at bay for now. But let's look at the short, and Manny, you can start off by telling us what do we hear in the opening minute of this short.
So let's start off with the first cue that you hear. Obviously, we hear The Merry-Go-Round Broke Down, the Looney Tune theme song by Cliff Friend and Dave Franklin. And then the opening title starts off with a song called Remember Me by Lennon and McCartney. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the Beatles. Harry Warren and Al Dubin. I like to call them the Lennon-McCartney Warner Brothers cartoons because Carl Stalling and prior to him, Norman Spencer and Bernard Brown did use a lot of their music, and they will continue to use a lot of music from Warren and Dubin. So the song itself, like I said, this is the one you hear during the opening titles, and you do hear it later on in the cartoon again. So the song comes from the 1937 Warner Brothers feature, Mr. Dodds Takes the Air. There are a lot of other songs in this film that were used in Warner Brothers cartoons, and I don't want to spoil them, but go check it out. If you want to learn more about Harry Warren, I suggest you listen to the commentary for A Great Big Bunch of You, And for Al Dubin, please check out the commentary for The Girl at the Ironing Board.
So after the title cards, we see the Crocodero, and we zoom right in and we see the first joke, which is very musical pun heavy, which Manny will go through in just a moment here. But right away, we haven't even seen Porky yet, and we see some really funny stuff there. It's incredible.
So you see Porky outside the Crocadero. He's excited. He wants to be a conductor. He wants to be a big shot musician. I know the feeling, those ambitions of working in the industry. I mean, I just hit 30 years as a musician. I'm looking at the date. I'm recording this November 24th, 2024. And the 15th of November, 2024, so about a week and some change, it was actually the 30th anniversary of my first performance. In the grand scheme of things, it may not seem like a big thing, but that was the first time I ever sang on stage in front of the public. I was singing at home, but my first music teacher, Mr. Walker, may he rest in peace, saw my ability, and he made me sing on stage in front of my school's open house ceremony that day, back in 1994. And 30 years later, here I am talking about cartoons and the music behind them. And I mean, I've said it before that Warner Brothers cartoons do play a huge part in my journey as a musician, not just because of what I do now, but I grew up watching these cartoons ever since my earliest memories, and I just love these cartoons, and I love music so much. And just seeing Porky's enthusiasm, he has a cartoon character, but it reminds you of where you started. So you see the sign outside the Crocodero, and it has the names of the various songs that you hear. And I remember I first saw this cartoon sometime in the early 2000s on Cartoon Network, probably on late night black and white. And I always liked the way that Carl Stalling and Milt Franklin arranged the music for this scene, especially like the muted trumpet you hear a lot. And as I got older, and then when I realized that the music in the background is the names of the songs are on the actual, I guess you would call it a sandwich board. But we were like, the poster outside the Crocadero, and I started laughing. Like, I was like, I'm like, I get the joke now. Like, this is actually really funny. So the first song you hear is Little Man, You've Had a Busy Day. And the music was written by Mabel Wayne, and the words were by Al Hoffman and Maurice Sigler. So this song was originally recorded in 1934, and like I said, this is the music you hear on the board at the Trocadero. At the Crocodero, not the Trocadero. That's the real club. So a little bit about Mabel Wayne. She was a New York born, she was born in Brooklyn, a female songwriter who had some success during this time period, because at this time period, most songwriters were male, and she did well for herself during this time period, despite all the struggles, and sadly, many of the struggles that women still deal with in society, in the arts, but just society in general. She was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1972. Al Hoffman, one of the lyricists, was one of the co-songwriters for two songs that you may have heard of in a film from Warner's rival, Disney, in 1950. Cinderella. He was a co-writer of A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes, and I didn't even realize he was a co-songwriter of that song. And for Maurice Sigler, didn't find much. All I found was that he has the same birthday as my dad. Then, while you're looking at the sandwich board, you hear In the Shade of the Old Apple Tree. You hear it very briefly again with muted brass. So this song is an old one. It was an oldie back then. It was from 1905, and it was written by Egbert Van Alstyne, and the lyrics were by Harry H. Williams. I just love that name, Egbert. That name really needs to come back. And then you're thinking that the final song that you hear is The Lady Who Couldn't Be Kissed, but it is not. Ha-ha! There's a plot twist. You hear the very familiar cue, The Lady in Red, by Mort Dixon and Ali Rubel. Oh, the lady in red. The fellas are crazy for the lady in red. So you hear that very briefly.
The diggity dog. All the big shots in person.
And that's when Porky starts talking and gets all excited. So, yeah, you would think that you would hear this. And that is actually a song, The Lady Who Couldn't Be Kissed. It's actually a song from the 1937 film, The Singing Marine. And the song became pretty famous with the rendition done by Duke Ellington. For The Lady in Red itself, wait till I get to the commentary for the cartoon of the same name, The Merry Melody from 1935. So stay tuned for that one. And then when Porky, once again, is getting all excited, he's showing, hey, I want to show my credentials. Kind of like with me, I'm like, I always feel, look, I went to college twice for music. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in music education, and music performance. But still to this day, I feel like I don't know what the heck I'm talking about. I know, I guess imposter syndrome run amok. But Porky shows off his sucker correspondence school of music diploma. I think that's what it says on mine as well, instead of university. I don't know. But I always get a kick out of that scene.
Yeah, I think my own diploma looks similar to that, except it's not the music one. It's to do with Bachelor of Arts, which, yeah, I could go on and on about how useless that is in the real world. But anyway, otherwise I'd be here for another hour and this video would be extra long. But I love this diploma, though, how it's so musically focused here. The hidey-hi, do-do-be-oop, and all that sort of stuff, and can he swing it, and all this wonderful scat language, I suppose, from a lot of the jazz singers of the time. I do wonder what the name of the professor is, because you got Porky's thumb covering part of it, so I wonder if there was another joke there. I don't know, but I do like the fact that it's even got a nice little bow in the corner. The SCG. I mean, it wouldn't be the Sydney Cricket Ground, of course, because that's what we refer to SCG here, but wow, just this one frame. Just love all the work that's put into it, especially with Porky Pig's name done in that wonderful fancy font right there. So it may be a sucker correspondence school of music, but it's a beautiful looking diploma, I will say that.
Now, what's a song that's playing when Porky's showing off his diploma? It is called We're Working Our Way Through College to Get a Bunch of Knowledge and Go Into a Lot of Debt. Oh, wait, sorry, that's the current lyrics for it, not the lyrics from 1937.
See?
So the song comes from the 1937 film Varsity Show. The music was written by Johnny Mercer. It was co-written, actually, by Johnny Mercer and Richard Whiting, two very prominent songwriters as well. And talking a little bit about Johnny Mercer, his birthday actually was a few days ago, November 18th. I remember listening to some of his music to celebrate. So Johnny Mercer is a very prolific songwriter who he co-wrote, or he wrote either the music or the lyrics for a lot of songs that were used in Warner Brothers cartoons. For example, he co-wrote with Richard Whiting, Hooray for Hollywood. He also wrote Jeepers Creepers, You Must Have Been a Beautiful Baby, and of course, Blues in the Night, because you've never heard that one before on Warner Shorts. And other songs that Johnny Mercer co-wrote include Days of Wines and Roses, Moon River, wider than a mile, gorgeous song. That Old Black Magic, Summer Wind, and Satin Rose with Duke Ellington. And some of the people that Mercer worked with, besides Richard Whiting, he, like I said, Satin Doll, he co-wrote that with Duke Ellington. He worked with Harry Warren, and very prolific songwriter. And some of these songs, like, for example, Summer Wind and Old Black Magic and Moon River, it makes me think of another Jersey boy, Frank Sinatra, who did a lot of Mercer's songs. So Richard Whiting, as I said, he co-wrote Hooray for Hollywood with Johnny Mercer, as well as the one I just mentioned, Working Our Way Through College. And some other songs that were used in Warner Brothers cartoons that he wrote or co-wrote include Ain't We Got Fun? In the morning, in the evening, ain't we got fun? Ride, Tenderfoot, Ride. I always think of Gold Rush Days, the 1939 Merry Melody that uses Ride, Tenderfoot, Ride a lot. Ride, Tenderfoot, Ride. You hear that in the beginning and the end of Gold Rush Days. Japanese Sandman. I always think of the Ductators, 1942, with the Japanese stereotype. But hey, Richard Whiting wrote that song. And another song that he worked on the Good Ship Lollipop, which reminds me of a Shirley Temple commercial that used to air. It was like a compilation of VHSs of Shirley Temple that they used to air on Nickelodeon a lot when I was a kid.
Manny will go through the references in relation to who these conductors are, but I love this scene about how Porky's going on about how he wants to be one of the great conductors, and he goes through each and every one, like Stokowski and so on. I did want to put this into context because back then they were actually seen as, I guess, something akin to a movie celebrities today. These were the cream of the crop. There were people to aspire to be a conductor of an orchestra or a band. It was seen as a really, really big deal and something to aspire to, whereas these days, maybe not to this level as Porky's so excited about. I guess these days it'd be about being a YouTube star or something. But in any case, I wanted to put that into context, but I love the animation here. I'm not sure who animated it. It looks like it's Volney White based on the smiles that Porky does when he does the Rudy Vallow bit, but In any case, it's so well animated, and I love the music that you hear throughout this scene too, and how it slows right down as soon as Porky notices that billboard showing just how much a meal costs at this place.
So later on, as Porky is talking about his conducting ambitions, he references, of course, the great Leopold Stokowski, and he starts conducting a little bit of the overture to The Poet and the Peasant by Franz von Suppe. And Leopold Stokowski, very famous conductor of that time period. He was parodied a lot in animation. I mean, for some Warner Brothers shorts, of course, long-haired hair, Leopold, that whole scene he's made fun of in Hollywood Steps Out. You see him in there. Of course, Leopold Stokowski was in the 1940 Disney film Fantasia. He was a conductor for that, and he was famous for not using a baton. If you remember the scene in Long-Haired Hair, when Bugs Bunny parodies him, he takes the baton from the conductor, and he breaks it in half, and he uses his hands. The Poet and the Peasant Overture is used a ton in animation. One of my favorite Popeye cartoons, The Spinach Overture from 1935. If you want to learn more about The Poet and the Peasant Overture and Franz von Suppe in particular, check out the commentary that I did for Shake Your Powder Puff, because that cartoon features this piece of music as well. And then when you see Porky go from his best Leopold Stokowski impression to Rudy Valley, the song that you hear is called Vieni Vieni. Now, Vieni Vieni, the music was written by a French composer named Vincent Scotto, and the words were written by George, it looks like Codger, Koger, like Roger, but all these composers and lyricists are French, so I'm going to go with George Coget. My French is terrible, so somebody please yell at me in the comments. And the other lyricist is Henry Varna, or I'm going to try to butcher the French again, Henri Varna. Henry, whatever. I haven't taken French in years, and I apologize for butchering it. However, this song became really famous by Rudy Valley, who took the song and adapted it into English. So like I said before, the song, it was originally a French song. I was actually listening to the original French version of it. It was written in 1934. So the verses are in French, but the refrain, I love this song. I've always liked it. I remember hearing it in this cartoon as a kid, and I always liked the melody of it, and I just liked the way that it, again, Carl Stalling, Milt Franklin knock it out of the park, the way they arrange it, having the woodwinds play like this little counter melody against the strings, and it sounds so lovely. And I like Porky's face turns into like a caricature of Rudy Valley with the buck teeth, and his eyes are like very interesting. I wish I knew who animated the scene. I would really get a kick out of knowing the thought process behind it. It's a shame we don't know a lot about this information for the animators at that time. But hey, paging Austin Kelly, paging Devin Baxter, if you guys can identify it, I would appreciate it. And I really like how Porky looks when he conducts in the scene. So yeah, Rudy Valley made it famous in 1937. And yeah, he rewrote the words in English. Now, a little bit about Vincent Scotto, the man who wrote the music. He was a prolific French composer. He was born in 1874. He wrote literally thousands of songs. He wrote operettas and so on and so forth. And George, or Codger, I'm going to go Coget. He was born in 1894 in France. I actually had to look up information from the French Wikipedia. I had to translate it because couldn't find much for him in the English version. So the next cue that you hear in the cartoon is when Porky Pig does his best impression of Benny Goodman, and you start hearing Sweet Georgia Brown with music by Maceo Pinkard and Ben Burney, because we've never heard that name before, in a Warner Brothers cartoon, and the lyrics were written by Kenneth Casey. So Sweet Georgia Brown has become a jazz standard. It was composed in 1925. And of course, a lot of Warner Brothers cartoons have used Sweet Georgia Brown throughout the history of the studio. It was pretty much a popular song that Carl Stalling would use. But most people can think of the version of the song that was recorded in 1949 by Brother Bones and his Shadows. That's the theme song for the Harlem Globetrotters, the Do, 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 do. I mean, you know the melody of Sweet Georgia Brown if you're watching a cartoon, but it's the one that's being whistled. But unfortunately, this cartoon does not have that version of Sweet Georgia Brown. And Benny Goodman, as people would know or should know, but I mean, that's why I'm here. Benny Goodman was a band leader, and he was also a jazz clarinetist. His nickname was the King of Swing. Born May 30th, 1909, and he passed away June 13th, 1986. Benny Goodman helped make swing music very popular in the 30s and 40s. He was also a proponent of racial integration because he had members of his group that were both white and black, especially during that time period, which was very groundbreaking and also very progressive and forward-thinking. And he did not write the song, but he's most known for the song Sing, 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 a 1936 song that was written by another jazz legend, Louis Prima, but the version that most people think of is Benny Goodman's rendition from 1937. And I mean, you had Benny Goodman playing the clarinet, Gene Krupa on the drums, Harry James on the trumpet, another guy who's made fun of in Warner Brothers cartoons, and so on and so forth. This cartoon doesn't have that song, but it's, as the kids would say now, that one is quite the banger. I'm showing my age. So Porky realizes, yeah, he's not going to get into the Crocadero. It's too expensive. And he looks at the price of the food. And the soundtrack cuts to With Plenty of Money and You by Warren and Dubin. Once again, of course, like I said, those guys are just super popular. I'm not going to get too much into detail about With Plenty of Money and You. I mean, I love the cue. It's one of my favorite songs used in Warner Brothers cartoons, but I'm not going to talk about it now because there is a 1937 Merry Melody with that song featured in it, and I'll save it for that. So Porky is heartbroken and dejected, and he starts walking away, and he's walking past the Crocadero, and the manager eventually catches notice of him, and he'll run out and grab Porky. And you hear Sentimental and Melancholy by Johnny Mercer and Richard Whiting. And that's the song that you hear during that scene. I already spoke about Johnny Mercer and Whiting earlier in the commentary, so I'm not going to go through that again.
Good, because I got the killer koala on standby for such a thing. But I like during this dejection scene by Porky, he's looking at the price, he's then feeling in his pockets how much money he actually has, and he has 1 cent. Ha ha. But I just love the rendition of that. It's like a background painting and such great detail. I love those types of shots, and it's the sort of thing that's still even used today. If you watch a lot of SpongeBob, they do this sort of thing all the time. And speaking of something that's done all the time, with Tashlin, you see the scene where Porky's walking along, he's all dejected, it's very slow, but then he notices the sign and whoop, it's a very quick movement where he rushes into the Crocodero. I guess he assumes he's going to be hired, I don't know, but it's a sort of thing that Tashlin will do all the time, especially in these earlier black and white shorts.
So the manager, the walrus, I think it's a walrus, yeah. He brings Porky inside the Crocodero to do his thing, clean dishes and whatnot. And during that scene, when Porky is cleaning the dishes, hilarity ensues. He starts fighting with the fly. The song you hear is called You Can't Stop Me From Dreaming by Cliff Wren and Dave Franklin, the songwriters of the Looney Tunes theme song, The Merry-Go-Round Broke Down. So kind of neat that that's there. And as Daniel Goldmark commented on the commentary that he did for the Looney Tunes Golden Collection, it's kind of neat that you hear that song playing in the background. Like, he's the one that brings it up in the commentary. But it's kind of like Porky's not let anything stopping him from achieving his dreams of being a band leader, especially a pesky fly that's going to get him fired from the Crocodero because he eventually does drop all the dishes in the process.
So according to Keith Scott in his wonderful Cartoon Voices book, that walrus boss, he's actually not quite sure who does the voice. He says here it's either Sig Rumman, I hope I said that correctly, or Dave Weber. So he's got a question mark for that. So clearly we need to find out some more information to see who actually did that voice, and hopefully that information will come to light. But I love the animation of this walrus boss where it's just a ball. The animators would animate the features around this ball, and the ball would just be that main thing that they keep still for the most part. And it's a really interesting effect here. I like that Tashlin is experimenting with that sort of stuff. It's amazing. And also I like this penguin scene where the penguin's going around to the tune of the music, and it's just such a fun little scene there. And if you look at the background, it's got that wonderful modern style that Tashlin was doing during this period of time when he was at the studio. And Tashlin includes this little joke where you got the giraffe and this penguin. He's very good at multitasking, I would say, because he gets the table lifted up towards the giraffe's mouth. Is it the funniest joke in the world? No, but it's a cute little bit, and I like the fact that Tashlin would add these little bits here and there, even though he doesn't really have to. So as Manny already mentioned, you got Porky up against this fly, and it's a wonderful bit of animation again, where he's, of course, trying to make sure he doesn't break all those plates while he's trying to get rid of this fly. Eventually, however, he breaks the plates, and this walrus boss kicks him out. I mean, I wonder how much those plates would cost, given the cost of the meals and such, but anyway. But again, if you look closely, this animation Porky isn't exactly the strongest in the world compared to what the other units were doing at this time, and yet Tashlin still makes it look really good despite that. Because at the time, he had some of the more weaker animators at the studio, and yet that didn't matter. He still got really good stuff out of them, and this scene is probably a good example of that. But the crowd is now growing restless, and they're all chanting, "We want music, we want music."
The loafer. We want music, 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 we want.
And again, Tashlin being Tashlin, he has to go cinematic even in this very simple scene. He could have gone away with just seeing the crowd just saying, "We want music, but no, he shows two extra shots, one of hands clapping to the actual chant, and of course the feet stomping as well. And we then cut to the walrus going around in circles on this rug, obviously worried, where is the band? What's going to happen?
So then you have the scene where the band that was supposed to come to the Crocodero originally, they can't make it. And then you have the crazy old man coming in on the scooter. And what do you hear during that scene? You start hearing, "The woods are full of cuckoos, cuckoos, cuckoos. The woods are full of cuckoos" by J.F. Coots and Charles Newman.
You owe me 60 cents, I bet you. Goodbye, I bet you.
I already spoke about The Woods Are Full of Cuckoos in the commentary that I did for that cartoon, 1937. So please go ahead and check out that prior commentary for, say it with me, "The woods are full of cuckoos." So yeah, go check that out, please. Give Anthony and myself some love, and you'll get a little more information about the songwriters as well. So while the manager is reading the telegram from Western Bunyan, Western Union, and it's kind of neat if you pause it, you see the names of various members of Tashlin's crew as like part of the staff or like the people who are the big wigs at Western Bunyan. In particular, you see Melvin Millar. He's the president of Western Bunyan. He was a writer. Tubby Millar. Melvin Millar is his real name. Volney White. He's the president of the board. He's another animator. And then you have Bob Bentley, the first vice president, who was also an animator at the Tashlin unit at the time. So the telegram reads, "Plane delayed. Forced landing. We fall down and go boom. The band leaders." To the manager of the Crocadero. And I did not know this until recently, but I want to shout out again my buddy Devin Baxter for pointing this out, that in the telegram, it's referencing a song, "We Fall Down and Go Boom." I had no idea all these years I would hear that phrase, "We fall down, go boom," like in some Clampett cartoons. I could think of Tweety screaming that.
Poor kitty cat. He fall down, go boom!
But I had no idea that that was actually a song that they were referencing. So, Devin, thanks for giving me that information, as well as everybody else.
Also, like in the top corner of that telegram, how it says, "No something," I'm assuming postage, "delivered in Manchuria, South China, or Burbank, not ever." So Burbank is where the studio is, of course. So it's a nice little in-joke, I guess, there. Oh, and that wonderful telegram character. I was getting a kick out of those old coots that you see in these shorts where it's like, yep, they've got that kind of vocal delivery. So when the telegram messenger goes, "I bet ya,"
You me 60 cents, I bet you. Goodbye, I bet you.
And these days is just one of those really obscure things, really, but the character Teeny from Fibber McGee and Molly, played by Marion Jordan, she would say, I betcha. So, for whatever reason, they got this telegram character to do that quote. I don't know why, but anyway, that's what that's referring to.
And also during the scene, you hear a reprise, whatever, I always forget how you say it, of Remember Me while the band leader is reading the telegram, and that's the same song that you heard in the opening titles.
Yeah, and they won't come at all, I bet you.
Now, once Porky, as a pull de wool over your eyes, Walrus, the owner of the Crocadero, he makes Porky, become the new band leader. Schnell means quick. I always get a kick out of that joke.
Swing dishwasher. I must get him back Schnell.
Ladies and gentlemen, Schnell means quick.
And we get that wonderful Tashlin trademark of the very quick cuts that he has done in quite a few of these Porkies by this point, and it works so well here, so it goes fast in one direction and fast back in the other. And even just before this, you see a repeat of animation where the audience is once again chanting, we want music, and I guess that's one way to keep the costs down, but hey, it works. And I love the animation of Porky being dressed up as one of the band leaders we're going to see, and Manny will go through each and every reference in just a moment. But that animation's really good, and it sets up probably the best part of this short, really, all these different band leaders from an era long gone.
So Porky becomes the band leader of the Crocodero, and he dresses up as Paul Whiteman, and when the band starts playing, you have a giraffe playing the clarinet, and this is not written in the cue sheet, but you hear a very small snippet of the beginning of Rhapsody in Blue by George Gershwin. So, a little bit about that piece. Rhapsody in Blue was written in 1924, and Paul Whiteman, who Porky is caricaturing in this scene as the Jazz King, or Paul Whiteman was called the King of Jazz, but in this cartoon he's called the Jazz King. Paul Whiteman commissioned George Gershwin to write Rhapsody in Blue, and during the premiere performance of it in 1924, Paul Whiteman's orchestra played the piece, and George Gershwin was playing the piano during the premiere. So the composer also was a fine piano player.
Now, Manny forgot to mention this, but he already covered Paul Whiteman in the track for Into Your Dance. So if you want to know more about Paul Whiteman, definitely check out that review.
And speaking of Paul Whiteman, the song that you hear the band playing, so you hear a little bit of Rhapsody in Blue, and then it goes into the song Avalon. So Avalon is a 1920 song that was co-written by Al Jolson and Vincent Rose, and that was actually one of the first songs that Paul Whiteman recorded and helped pretty much get him onto his career, so to speak.
It's a wonderful scene, this whole parody of Paul Whiteman. Of course, they have to target his belly because he was a big boy in real life, of course, but the animation is so good. Of course, great music. That should be pretty obvious there, but even the animation, like I said, of the belly, the patrons dancing, and even the bit of the penguin where, again, you don't really need this bit, but it's these little touches that make these Tashlin shorts so good, where the penguin comes up and one of the band members very cheekily pinches some of the, I'm assuming it's champagne or whatever alcoholic beverage is there, and the penguin's not too happy, but in any case, it's a wonderful scene.
So after you see Porky do a quick change, he becomes a caricature of Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians, or in the cartoon, Guy Lumbago and his Boiled Canadians. I always got a kick out of that. And of course, since he's Canadian, Porky goes from dressing up as Paul Whiteman to being one of the members of the Royal Mounted Police. I mean, I can't help but think of Ren and Stimpy, the Royal Canadian Kilted Yaxmen. I can't. Oh, that show is so weird. I don't know why I was watching that back in the 90s. But the song that you hear during the scene, and you have one of the members of the orchestra imitating Carmen Lombardo or Crimen Lumbago. The song you hear is called Summer Night.
Summer night,
starry skies. You can see my sweetheart with 1,000 eyes.
And it was co-written once again by Warren and Dubin, and it comes from the film Sing Me a Love Song. And now a little bit about the person that Porky is parodying in the scene, Guy Lombardo. So his real name was Gaetano Alberto Lombardo. So he was of Italian ancestry. His parents actually came from Italy. So Guy Lombardo, born June 19th, 1902 in London, England. No, I'm kidding. He's Canadian, London, Ontario, Canada. And he died November 5th, 1977 in where I used to live, Houston, Texas, United States. Was a Canadian-born American dance leader whose New Year's Eve radio and television broadcasts with his Royal Canadians became an American tradition for 48 years. Derided by some music critics as the king of corn, Lombardo gained long-lasting popularity by conducting what was billed as the sweetest music this side of heaven. With his brother Carmen playing lead saxophone, his band introduced more than 300 songs and sold more than 250 million recordings. Wow, that's a lot. And by the way, this information comes from the Britannica.com website. I quote, "He first broadcast nationally from Chicago in 1927, and by 1929 he was the winter attraction at New York City's Roosevelt Grill, a booking repeated for more than 30 years. After the grill closed, Lombardo moved to the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, continuing to televise New Year's Eve broadcasts beginning in 1954 that climaxed with the playing of Auld Lang Syne. He became a naturalized United States citizen in 1937, unquote." And what I think is kind of neat is another naturalized citizen used to work at the Waldorf Astoria. I'm referring to my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, Aurora. My grandma worked at the Waldorf Astoria sometime in the 60s. I think she operated the elevators. And yeah, like I said, my grandmother was a Cuban immigrant, but she became a naturalized American citizen. So here we go back to the article a little bit more about Guy Lombardo, and I quote, "Beginning as a non-tet, which is 9 members, the Royal Canadians numbered 16 by 1968. Long tenure was common in the orchestra. Dewey Bergman was Lombardo's arranger from the orchestra's inception in London, Ontario, Canada, 1923, until he died in 1971. Guy and Carmen siblings, Liebert, who played lead trumpet, Rosemarie and Victor, and their brother-in-law Ken Garner were all band members," unquote. Now, in the cartoon, the person who's doing the vocals is Carmen Lumbago, which was a parody of Carmen Lombardo. And Carmen, he had a habit, because I was listening to some of his recordings, of adding some, like a trembling quality, an extra vibrato to his performance, and a little bit about him. So Carmen Lombardo, born July 16th, 1903, in London, Ontario, Canada, and he died April 17th, 1971 in Miami, Florida. He was the lead saxophone player and the featured vocalist for his brother's orchestra. So this information is from Wikipedia. In 1927, Carmen Lombardo was the lead vocalist of the hit record Charmaine, performed by Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians, and unquote. And like I was saying before, it was the brothers and their sister and brother-in-law that were involved as part of the Royal Canadians, and he just had that trembling which in the recording in the cartoon, Mel Blanc brilliantly does the warbling vocals of Summer Night in this cartoon. So that's a little bit about Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians, or boiled Canadians, but I don't want to boil any Canadians. They're actually pretty nice people. I also wanted to mention, before I forget, that Carmen Lombardo, or Lumbago, I'm trying to remember honestly at this point, is singing into a microphone and broadcasting from KFWB, which was Warner Brothers' radio station that they had in LA that started sometime in the 1920s.
This scene is an excellent example of what we mean, where you can do these references to something very obscure, but you don't need to know them in order to enjoy the scene. I mean, if you're watching this as a kid and you don't know who these people are, you would still get a kick out of this crazy old man singer wobbling his voice like that. And I like the other touches where you see the people dancing. The effect probably didn't turn out as well as it could have, but you can see the sort of shaking to the wobbling when the singer is singing it. And I guess we're going to have a rule of 3, because the penguin comes back, another band member cheekily pinches some more champagne, and the singer later on is taken away by someone from the asylum or mental institution, whatever. If you pay close attention, you look at the eyes of that attendant there is just as crazy as well. But overall, it's a great scene, and once again, it's an excellent example of that you don't need to know the references to have fun with this one.
I don't eyes, summer night, oh how I envy you.
So the final song that you hear in this cartoon, and this is a scene that I never saw this cartoon on Nickelodeon. I saw this cartoon on Cartoon Network, late night black and white, sometime in the early 2000s. And I did see this uncut on Cartoon Network back in the day. But the scene with the unfortunate stereotypes of Porky and blackface imitating Cab Calloway, and then briefly he walked across the screen as a stereotypical Chinese man. But it's related to the song itself. So the final song that you hear is called Chinatown, My Chinatown, with music by Gene Schwartz and lyrics by William Jerome. The song is from 1906, and it has become a jazz standard.
Chinatown, my Chinatown, when the lights are low. Oh, dreamy, dreamy Chinatown. Chinatown. Oh, dreamy, dreamy Chinatown.
So Schwartz and Jerome were Tin Pan Alley composers. A little bit about them. So Gene Schwartz, born November 4th, 1878, and he passed away on my father's 4th birthday, November 30th, 1956. And I'm recording this on November 30th, almost 70 years after he passed away. Ooh, kind of morbid. But he wrote songs. He was a Tin Pan Alley composer. He wrote stuff for Broadway, and he had a long partnership with William Jerome. Schwartz was born in Hungary, and then he came to the United States and settled in New York City on the east side of Manhattan. And he learned how to play piano, and he started working eventually with William Jerome sometime later, and he started composing. They were Tin Pan Alley composers. And a little bit about William Jerome. His full name was William Jerome Flannery, born September 30th, 1865, and he died June 25th, 1932. He was born in New York on Cornwall on Hudson, New York, and his parents were immigrants from Ireland. He was already performing when he was young. He was working in vaudeville, and he did perform in blackface. Again, this is a product of that time period. But he collaborated with Schwartz, and they wrote a decent amount of songs, and he died young because he was hit by a car, sadly, in 1932, and he died, as I said, June 25th in Newburgh, New York. So, who is Porky caricaturing in this scene? And it's one of the legends of American jazz music, of the great Cab Calloway. So I can spend a big while talking about Cab Calloway because the guy was so influential to American pop culture, to American music, to American jazz music. So here's a little information about Cab himself. The information that I'm about to read from Cab Calloway comes from the Wikipedia article, but I like the way that it sums up his life. I was reading other articles, but I just like the way that they described just how influential Cab was. So, this is from the Wikipedia article, and I quote, Cab Calloway III, he was born Christmas Day, 1907, in Rochester, New York, and he died November 18th, 1994, in Hockessin, Delaware. Oh, wow. So, yeah, I was a kid in first grade when he passed away. Wow, it's kind of neat that I get to read about someone and talk about someone who existed, well, I existed in the same time frame as them. So he was an American jazz singer and band leader. He was a regular performer at the Cotton Club in Harlem, New York, where he became a popular vocalist of the swing era. His niche of mixing jazz and vaudeville won him acclaim during a career that spanned over 65 years, unquote. So yes, in the scene where you see the sign just before Porky starts singing as Cab Calloway, it says Cab Calloway and his Absorbent Cotton Club. Get it? Cotton, absorbing. But yeah, referencing the actual Cotton Club in New York City, which was a nightclub that a lot of famous black performers performed at, like the Mills Brothers, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Count Basie, Fats Waller, you name it. And like I said, this was still during this time period with a lot of segregation going on, but a lot of black performers and black audiences got to enjoy the cream of the crop when it came to artists at that time period. So continue on with the article, and I quote, Calloway was a master of energetic scat singing and led one of the most popular dance bands in the U.S. from the early 30s to the late 40s. His band included trumpeters like Dizzy Gillespie, saxophonists Ben Weber and Leon Chewberry, guitarist Danny Barker, bassist Milt Hinton, and drummer Cozy Cole, unquote. And I was reading that Cab Calloway was coached in scat singing and learned how to do it from the great Louis Armstrong. So continuing on, and I quote, Calloway had several hit records in the 30s and 40s, becoming the first black musician to sell 1 million copies of a record. He became known as a hidey-ho man of jazz for his most famous song, Minnie the Moocher, originally recorded in 1931, unquote. And for those of us that know our animation history, there is a Fleischer Studios cartoon called Minnie the Moocher that features Cab Calloway's vocals in it, and they even have a scene where Cab Calloway's performance was rotoscoped, where he turned into a walrus in the cartoon. That was with Betty Boop and Bimbo. So going back to the article, I quote, he reached the Billboard chart in 5 consecutive decades, the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and he made several stage, film, and television appearances until his death in 1994 at the age of 86. He had roles in films like Stormy Weather, 1943, Porgy and Bess, 1953, The Cincinnati Kid, 1965, and Hello, Dolly, 1967. His career enjoyed a marked resurgence from his appearance in the 1980 film The Blues Brothers. Calloway was the first African-American to have a nationally syndicated radio program. In 1993, Calloway received the National Medal of Arts from the U.S. Congress. He posthumously received the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2008. His song, Minnie the Moocher, was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1999, and it was added to the Library of Congress's National Recording Registry in 2019. In 2022, the National Film Registry selected his home films for preservation as culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant films, and he was inducted into the Big Band and Jazz Hall of Fame and the International Jazz Hall of Fame, unquote. I can just keep going on and on and on and on about Cab Calloway because he was so influential. As I said, he was the first black artist to sell 1 million copies. He's been honored by the National Film Registry, the National Recording Registry. You know, he was a pioneer in just the way that he sang, the way that he, you know, his scat singing, the whole hidey-hi, hidey-ho aspects of jazz music come from him, from Minnie the Moocher, other songs like St. James Infirmary that he performed. He wore zoot suits and he helped make those popular during that time frame. Again, I can just go on and on and on. And he was one of the trendsetters that so many people have copied and honored to this very day. And again, it's a shame that in this cartoon it features a parody of him as a blackface stereotype, but it's nice and it's unfortunate they couldn't get the actual Cab Calloway to perform in the cartoon like what Fleischer did with the cartoon Minnie the Moocher. Thanks again to Keith Scott's excellent book, Cartoon Voices of the Golden Age. Unfortunately, we don't have much info for who is doing the singing voice of Cab Calloway in this cartoon. All it says, it's the Sing Band, and that's what Keith Scott says for the caricature of Cab Calloway and the singers in the band.
This scene is easily the highlight of the short, and yes, I know, it's problematic. We can go over and over about how problematic it is, but whatever. I'm just focusing on the animation here and the music. As Manny points out, Cab Calloway, one of the greats, fantastic music, and is someone that I actually listen to as well on a frequent basis. He truly is a legend. And if you haven't seen Minnie the Moocher, it's online on YouTube as well. I'm not sure if it's under copyright or not, but it's there, so definitely check it out and watch the full thing because it's an incredible cartoon. Look at the animation. I mentioned before that the Tashlin had the quote-unquote weaker animators out of all the units, and yet by looking at this scene, you wouldn't really think so. I'm not sure who animates this scene, but my goodness, they go all out here. This actually reminds me of what Scribner would do later on for Clampett. Obviously, it's not Scribner here. I don't want to spread ridiculous information around or misinformation around, but it's got that same kind of energy and vibe. And also with Tashlin, with what he's been doing around this period of time, there'll be so much quick cutting and so many jokes thrown in your face that you don't even have time to breathe in this scene. You get the third part of the penguins and champagne getting stolen, which there's no real punchline there. You'd think with the rule of three that something would happen there, but it actually doesn't. And then you have the whole instruments breaking with the goat having to use his goatee, I guess. That's where that would come from. But anyway, to continue playing the violin. You got all the animals playing the instruments in such a fast tempo. It's an incredible scene. And yeah, it's a shame about how some of it actually looks, but man, there's just so much energy pouring out of this one. I mean, just look at that octopus at the very end, just playing the drums like crazy, and of course, ending up being worn out at the very end. It's fantastic. The ending is kind of abrupt, so of course, Porky takes a bow. He's done a great job for the evening, and I'm assuming they're going to keep him on board, or they might kick him out before the real bands come back. I don't know, but we basically end there. And that whole penguin bit, that's really a rule of four here, because we get the penguin going, nope, you're not stealing the champagne, I'm gonna have it. The end.
Gotta give a shout out to the unsung hero of this cartoon, the penguin butler. I mean, every time he walks, you hear the xylophone. That was a terrible xylophone impression, but I just love when he's like walking around the tables and you hear the xylophone playing. And the running gag in a cartoon where he's trying to deliver a drink, and one of the trombone players decides to use the slide of the trombone to absorb the alcohol through the trombone. And then just the way that he walks backwards, like on one leg, and you hear the xylophone playing again with the penguin. I always get a kick out of that. And of course, the cartoon ends with the payoff to the running gag where the penguin says, you know what? I'm going to drink the drink before you lay hands on it. And a nice little bum, 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 bum at the end of the cartoon.
So before our final thoughts, here is my good friend Austin Kelly. He's been on all of the Frank Tashlin videos on this channel, and he's going to add a few thoughts on this one. He wasn't feeling the greatest at the time, but he still wanted to send something in, so he apologizes for the quality of his voice in this one. But in any case, take it away, Austin.
Hi all, it's Austin Kelly here once again to discuss another classic Tashlin picture, Porky at the Crocadero from 1938. You know, childhood nostalgia does a lot, but I really remember loving this cartoon a lot more as a kid than I did as an adult. I tried to figure out what didn't thrill me upon my rewatch, then I came up with a few things. First off, there's nothing terribly exciting or unique about the story structure in this one. The main story, which becomes totally finished and resolved by about 4 minutes into the 7-minute picture, is nothing special. It's a rags to riches story about Porky Pig becoming the big band conductor he's always dreamed of becoming. But the funniest part is that Porky really didn't do anything to win this position. It wasn't like he worked hard at trying to become a band leader or anything, and for that reason the ultimate conclusion of success doesn't feel that well earned. But the method in which he conducts, instantly changing through genres and different kinds of band leading, is just absurd and based on no real skill. And because of that, it actually fits Porky that he should get a conducting job that requires no real conducting skill, because he himself, well, has no skill. So if all the cartoon is a bit absurd in its structure, then what is there to like? Well, thankfully, cartoons have the benefit of not needing to follow usual laws of nature, or storytelling for that matter. So by having such a fast-paced story be told in such a nonsense fashion, the best thing to actually get from the film is the energy. And in Porky at the Crocodero, everything just moves fast. You know, Frank Tashlin was praised for speeding up the timing in Warner cartoons at a faster rate than Avery did, even though Avery usually gets that credit for speeding up cartoons in general. And this is a great example of seeing that happen. What this cartoon lacks that Avery's never did was a watertight story structure around which to create insane series of gags. But like I said, it's not as if that's necessary in this situation, since the high levels of energy make up for it. Porky at the Crocodero, everything is constantly moving and changing to a very humorous and successful effect. The telegram boy speeds around in circles in between his line reads. When the walrus who runs the Crocodero runs to get Porky back, he speeds through several backgrounds, spending just a few frames on each one. When there's a pause in the action, it's filled with a perfectly timed joke, as in when the walrus freezes mid-sprint for the narrator to explain what Schnell means. But for Frank Tashlin, one fast-paced scene isn't enough. He constantly intercuts one funny happening with another. When Cryman Lombardo stutters his lyrics, Tashlin cuts to the audience, whose dancing stutters along with him. After that, he cuts to a running gag of a penguin waiter who can't just seem to deliver his drink. And when the sequence starts to grow long and tiring, Tashlin cuts it off by having a medic carry the Cryman out in a wheelchair. The sense of timing in this and all surrounding Tashlin films of the era is impeccable. And although Tex Avery may have lasted longer and ultimately become the higher praise of the two, when watching something like Porky the Crocodero, it's easy to see where Avery got a lot of his sensibilities from, and where the fast-paced gag cartoon really got its start. Until next time, I'm Austin Kelly saying, does anybody really know who Lou Landsman was?
I love this cartoon. I forgot how fun it is, how energetic it is. So it was really fun to revisit this one. When I first saw this cartoon 20-something years ago on late night black and white, I just thought it was like such a cool musical cartoon, and now really digging deep. I mean, really digging deep, because this is probably the longest commentary I've ever recorded. Sorry, Anthony.
Release the killer koala.
But it was fun to revisit this one, and it just makes me bummed out that, Tashlin didn't have a long career in animation, but he made the most of the time that he was. So these are my thoughts in Manny's Music Time, and a whole lot of information for Porky at the Crocodero, a really fun cartoon. It was fun to just dig into the history of the Trocadero and of the people that Porky was parodying, and just some excellent music with the tons of cues. I mean, it was like 17 music cues that I went through in this commentary. So thanks for listening. Thanks for the support, for Anthony, for me, and for everyone else that helps out in this channel. Please follow me on social media at the Toony Tenor, TheToonyTenor, for updates on my life as a musician and a multifaceted geek. I mean, who knows? Maybe one day I'll do a cover of one of Cab Calloway's tunes, or maybe I'll do my best Carmen Lombardo impression. Summer nights. There you go. Just wobble like a turkey. Hey, Thanksgiving just passed a few days ago. So thanks for listening, folks. And I'll see you soon on another Manny's Music Time or another commentary. And that's all, folks. That's my Porky impression. I mean, I'll leave it to Bob Bergen or Eric Bauza. They do a better job. See ya.
So after all that, what do I think of this short? It's perhaps not my go-to Tashlin short, but man, it's got so many good things about it. I do agree with what Austin Kelly said, that the story seems to be somewhat secondary. It's the other things that are much better in this short, and I would say, yeah, the animation is some great stuff there. Like I said, with the walrus manager guy, how he's just basically a ball and they animate around that, and all the incredible vibrant animation, especially of Porky dressed up as Cab Calloway, among other things, and plus the music. Hence why I got Manny on board, and yes, this review may have been an hour, but I hope you guys have learned a lot in relation to a lot of the participants of the musical cues involved, and for the few that are not in this review, check out the other reviews that Manny's been a part of so you get some further history on it. In terms of rating, this one gets 8.5 out of 10. Again, it's not Tashlin's best in my opinion. It's not a go-to one for me, but man, when I do get a chance to see this one, it's such a ball to listen to. It's a really good one. It's a shame that Tashlin's only got a few more shorts after this one before he leaves Warner Brothers for the second time and then returns back to the studio in the 1940s. But that will do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and until next time, take care.